I want to continue here, and we're still in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot to talk about, but you, in the late 50s, you directed several adaptations of some of the classics
Right.
of our time. The first one, I believe, was The Prince and the Pauper.
Right.
How was that experience?
Oh, it was fabulous. It was a great material and a wonderful acting ensemble. And you know, it's a classic story, so just great to work on. And David Susskind was the producer of those, and a better producer you're not likely to find. I thought he was a great producer, great guy.
What made him a great producer? He certainly he's another one of those legendary producers of the
Right.
time. What made him so great?
From my point of view, I could, you know, David would be very opinionated, very sure in what he had to say. But if you challenged him, and anyway, he would fight you to the death, practically. But if you were so convinced that in your position he would eventually back down, he wouldn't just pull the boss thing. I'm the boss, and therefore you do it my way, which a lot of other producers did. You didn't argue with them; they just told you. So, but David would permit argument, and I loved him for that reason. We fought a lot, but it was always again in pursuit of the excellence of the project, and not about the personality or being the boss.
Was he a hands-on producer?
Very much so. Oh yeah, very much so in the script and in casting, all aspects of it. Very much a hands-on producer.
Generally, in those days, in the 50s and 60s, did you appreciate a hands-on director, or did you prefer sometimes not to have the producer there and to work with more freedom?
No, yeah, there's of course that going. You know, you like to be running your own ship, but on the other hand, if it's somebody like David, those were some of the best scripts that I was ever asked to do. So I'd rather take what he has to give, even though it may be uncomfortable at times, and maybe he does try to boss me around, and but he also supplied me with the best material that I could possibly wish for.
In regards to The Prince and the Pauper, who were some of the actors that you worked with in that show?
Dear, I'm trying to think.
Christopher Plummer, maybe?
Chris Plummer was wonderful. It's and who else was? Sean. Pardon?
Patty Duke, maybe?
Oh, Patty Duke played a little role of a little girl that he meets along the way, and she was absolutely adorable. Just a great kid.
And Rosemary Harris and Rex Thompson, some other people.
Mm.
Another one of those classics is Wuthering Heights.
Wuthering Heights with Richard Burton, and Rosemary Harris was in that as well.
And Patty Duke was in there as well, right?
Right. She was. I used Patty several times. I mean, it was unmistakable in her case too that she would, you know, naturally, she certainly would be a child star. Whether or not she would go all her career as she has was maybe a question, but she's just a great lady from a great little girl.
How long were these shows?
I think they were 90 minutes. I'm pretty sure they were. Not as long as 2 hours, but longer than an hour.
And they were all live, correct?
Oh yes, totally.
Oliver Twist, another one.
Oliver Twist, fantastic.
Any specific challenges from that show?
Um,
Or memories?
uh, Memory is the thing. There were some difficulties with one of the actors toward the end of the show when he's summing up the whole thing. This is what happened, and so on. He got mixed up, and we were never quite sure what did happen in the past. But other than that, there was Robert Morley was in that. He was just an incredible actor.
A young Richard Thomas?
Young Richard Thomas, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very.
William Hickey was...
Bill Hickey, my goodness. Yeah, one of those characters. I can't. It does go back quite a way. So
I understand. Treasure Island was the fourth one of of those classic series.
Right.
With the great Boris Karloff.
Boris Karloff was in it, and
how was he to work with?
Oh, the sweetest angel of all time. To have him be a sinister figure is kind of hard to figure out, because he was just a very nice man. He has kind of a lisp in his talking to you, but he was a very, very pleasant gentleman. Who else? Hugh
Griffith?
Hugh Griffith, wonderful actor, incredible man, who was in Tom Jones with Albert Finney and a number of other pictures like that. He was just a great force of nature.
Was it a challenge to take these to make these adaptations from classic novels and put them on the screen? Was there anxiety about how best to do that?
Oh yes, and sometimes before a magnificent motion picture had been done. In the case of Wuthering Heights, with Richard was, of course, very competitive with Lord Olivier, and wanted to challenge him wherever he could. So he entered the whole thing of Wuthering Heights with real gusto. We had to make a cast change there. There was a actress. If ever an actor needed to have a sort of warmth in a relationship, it was that material, Kathy, so we had cast somebody who really looked the role beautifully. She was just a wonderful black hair, curly hair, but Richard came to me after about 2 days of rehearsal and said, "I can't stand it," and so I had to call my friend would she come in and take over, and so Rosemary, thank God, did, and wore a black wig and so on, but she's such a great actress that it came off really well.
An actor that we talked about briefly off camera just now was James Dean.
Oh, yes.
Did you work with him?
I worked with him on at least 5 occasions. I did Treasurymen in Action in those days, but I also said The Big Story was called. There were other half-hour dramas of that nature, and whenever you got a delinquent kid, it reached out for Jimmy Dean because he was so wonderful, and he played a delinquent kid, a hostile young man, very, very well. But he was a joy to work with. He was not in any way difficult whatsoever. He came to work. He was a real pro, and he was very quiet, and never heard yip out of him. Except that he was constantly astounding you by virtue of, ooh, where did he ever come up with that? That's great. It was not directed by me, but I'm willing to accept it as mine.
Was that his greatest talent, do you think? I mean, as a director, um, what do you think contributed to his success and his talent?
Oh, just an incredible innate ability that is born with, you know. He just had that sensibility, that um, expressiveness of soul. Um, there's no accounting for it, you know. What makes a guy run the 100-yard dash in 9 seconds, you know. He has to have God-given gift. Jimmy Dean had a God-given gift.
There's the debate between which still goes on today, which is talent versus trained acting. What do you think about that debate?
I don't think there's any debate. To me, I think it has to, both things have to be there. You know, when Richard, Chris Plummer, for example, did John Barrymore. And in seeing the play, I didn't know this about Barrymore and his background. I thought it was, again, just given. But when he was going to do Hamlet, or when he was going to do one of the great roles, he went to a woman voice person, and she worked with him for months and months on end on voice. And so Richard Burton trained as an actor. He went to RADA or Lambda or whatever. Laurence Olivier went to acting school. And Jimmy Dean was involved in all kinds of classes and so forth. So the combination is what really makes it. I believe in you know, God-given talent. That's you got to have that. But you have to be like a concert violinist. You know, your instrument is your body, your voice, and so on. And you have to train that. You can't pick up a violin and play Mozart just like that. You have to really work on it. Then if you have a God-given talent, very good. And the third thing is who you are essentially in your gut. So you have to study in order to discover who you are, or to build a person who is intellectually challenged and intellectually challenging. So all those three elements are important to an actor: talent, training, and who you are. How you will come up if you're I'm just thinking of the guy who played in Death of a Salesman, Brian Dennehy. It's how Brian Dennehy, in his gut, portrays that kind of a character and so forth. If he doesn't have gut, he's not successful, even though he has, you know, good size, and as a matter of fact, he's almost too big to be. He has a handicap there, but it's the way he
for the character.
For the character. Mm-hmm. So anyway.
Terrific. In 1960, you directed a 90-minute television movie, but it was called Victory, right?
Oh yes.
But were television movies called television movies at that point, or were they really considered anthologies?
No. I remember when I got the call about Silent Night, Lonely Night, that was the time where there were, for the first time I heard that term, MOW, or, you know.
Which means?
Movies for television.
Or movies of the week.
Movies of the week.
Right, yeah. And so Silent Night was 1969, so this was 1960.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Victory, tell us about that, and who was in that?
That was
Art
Carney. Art Carney. Lois Smith was absolutely wonderful in it. Richard, the Irish actor.
Harris.
Richard Harris. Eric Portman was in it. Wonderful, brilliant actor. Oscar Omolka, I think, was in it.
Correct.
And that's about all I can remember.
That's good. I don't mean to quiz you on this.
Yeah.
Tell us about Art Carney, for example. Here, he's coming off of the show Honeymooners, but he
Right.
really had a terrific dramatic career.
Right.
Tell us about Art Carney in this show.
Art Carney was, he did this thing absolutely beautifully. You know, his stock in trade at that time was, you know, the guy with the pork pie hat and goofy, you know, kind of a comic persona that he had developed, which was very, very funny, dumb, and so forth. But when he did this is a very intelligent, quiet man who lives in isolation and loves it there, loves the isolation in which he is living in the South Seas, and then things begin to happen in his life which challenge him deeply, and seeing then how he handles himself under those circumstances and heroically. Was not exactly the buffoon that we were used to seeing. He was quite amazing. I always thought that was somewhat undervalued talent and acting instrument that existed. I just wished he had more of a career in that way. You know, the one he did with the cat, Paul Mazursky's picture.
Right, I can't. Yeah.
Yeah, that had some of that there, but there was also the comic aspect. I didn't want him to have any comic thing, just to have that other dimension.
It always seems
Tonto and me.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that there are very few people or actors who could go between comedy and
Yes.
drama as successfully as he did.
As he did, yeah.
In that same year, you also made your film directing debut on a Warner Brothers movie called The Bramblebush.
The Bramblebush, yeah.
How was that experience, and how different was that from directing television?
Very different, from my point of view. In directing for television, we had all the cameras there. We were editing as we go and so forth. So the cameras would tell their story too, as well as what the actors were saying and how the actors were behaving. When you get on a set with one big lump of lead in the middle of the set, and you go on to this person, and then later you go on to that person, and then you go on to that person, it doesn't have the fluidity that I had experienced on live television sets. So I found myself very, very handicapped by that. And also, once you finish in the studio on the night of the show in live, you walk home, it's over, it's totally over. Once you finish, you've only done a little mosaic on, if it's 50-day schedule, then it's 50 little pieces that later have to be put together. It was, for me, a really entirely different experience, and I suffered through it a lot. Also, had no idea about what my rights were, or if I had any rights as to post-production. I'd never had post-production. 20 years of doing live television. It never had post production. It was on the air. It was live. So it made for a good deal of suffering on my part, and determination, of course, that I also learned. And I tried very hard with my next picture, which was, but it had the handicap of being a stage play, an adaptation of a stage play, which is more like the live norm, because we did proscenium type sets. So it was very difficult after it had been done with proscenium to unproscenium it.
What was the name of this next film, and who was it starring?
Oh, it was Sidney Poitier and A Raisin in the Sun, and Claudia McNeil and Ruby Dee and Diana Sands. Wonderful cast, incredible cast.
So was your experience with this movie much better because of what you learned on the first one?
It was a lot better, but I was still felt, but I got very much more involved in post and than I had before. I now knew that it didn't end when the shooting schedule ended. It was only beginning, and that it had a lot more to go after that, with score, with editing for performances and so forth.
From that movie, you won the DGA award, which is one of many times that you won that award, which is from your peers. How was that to win that award?
Unbelievable! Just incredible. I look upon the awards that I've gotten as endorsements, you know, and it's nice to be to have that kind of validation that you've done something that that other people recognize and that they respond to. So it's a fabulous thing. Win an Emmy, I love it.
Did you ever feel that winning an award, certainly the prestigious one that's DGA or the Emmy, for example, did that add pressure to your next endeavors?
No.
About bettering what yourself or what you did?
No, I don't think so. Each individual thing, it's good to have that in the background, but it doesn't interfere with the future.
Now, your career, you're one of the handful of directors who have successfully gone back and forth between television and film. Right after you did A Raisin in the Sun, you directed an episode of Defenders, for example. You returned to television.
Right.
Why was that, and how was that experience?
Well, I thought it was great. That was a Herb Brodkin produced series. I thought they did really good things. Of my fellow directors who were doing that show, I respected every one of them, and thought I would like to be doing what they're doing, and so, oh sure, I would. As a matter of fact, at one point I was offered Defenders, and I had taken something else, and I remember being very upset about that. That even though it was an hour long, but it was on film, and that was a great way to explore and learn how to move that camera around in anticipation of the editing process.
And it certainly was a groundbreaking show with the subject matter, the social issues, and all that it dealt with. I believe you did an episode called The Benefactor. Any memories on that show?
Not really. It was. I remember good things about it, and I remember the title. That's all.
Did you did you see yourself at this point um, pursuing a television directing career or motion pictures or both?
Uh, I think that I remember one thing about that time was whether to be on the West Coast or on the East Coast, and I bought into the Woody Allen um, theory of what makes the difference between California or what makes a different cultural advantage, that the only cultural advantage that California has is that you can make a right turn on a red light. But all the rest it belongs to New York. And I bought into that. And so even while New York was drying up in terms of TV, which was a good way for me to earn a pretty good income over the course of a year. When that was taken away, I then was in a way forced to move to California. A lot of my peers, Frankenheimer and many others, Sidney Pollack, and with a few notable exceptions like Sidney Lumet, stayed in New York. But most of the others had gone to the West Coast, and I beat myself around after I got there for the first 2 or 3 years that I hadn't done it before, and that I could still always avail myself to the cultural aspects of New York. I'd go in and see 6 plays in 7 nights, and go to the Met and the Met Museum and the Met Opera. All of those things that while I lived in New York, I didn't really take advantage
of. Another show that you did in the '60s was the Bob Hope Chrysler Theater show. It's a long time.
Yes, but that was One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, which had just been published, and we got it. And Jason was Ivan Denis. Jason Robards Jr. was Ivan, and it was a wonderful show that had a very unhappy ending as far as I was concerned. When I left, but I was still living in New York at that time, and came out to California to do that show, and we did it, and I loved it, and somewhere along the line after I had left, the editor called me and said that he had, and who I had loved, I had not seen the full cut, but I had seen several scenes being put together by this guy, and he called me and said that he had been shifted off of One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich to some other show. And I said, oh, that's terrible. I complained to the producer and so on, but I didn't get anywhere. And so I watched it on the air at home. And the whole idea of the story was you start with these men getting up in the morning and going out for a long day.
I'm going to stop you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.